In the grand halls of Valdoria Palace, where whispers carry more weight than gold and secrets can topple crowns, one conversation between a queen and her guard would shake the very foundations of a thousand-year-old monarchy. What started as a simple accusation would unravel a web of lies, betrayal, and hidden truths that had been carefully buried for decades. The morning mist clung to the ancient stones of Valdoria Palace like a shroud, as if nature itself sensed the storm brewing within those hallowed walls. Queen Isabella Montclair stood at her chamber window, her fingers gripping the silk curtains until her knuckles turned white. The kingdom of Valdoria had known peace for 30 years under her reign, but today, that peace felt as fragile as spun glass. The queen's piercing blue eyes, which had commanded respect in royal courts across 3 continents, now burned with barely contained fury. Her auburn hair, usually arranged in an elegant chignon befitting her station, hung loose around her shoulders, betraying the sleepless night she had endured. The cause of her distress lay not in matters of state or foreign diplomacy, but in something far more personal and infinitely more dangerous. Captain Marcus Blackwood, the head of her personal guard, had served the royal family for 15 years with unwavering loyalty. His reputation was sterling, his record unblemished, and his dedication to protecting the crown had never once been questioned. Yet now, as Isabella stared out at the manicured gardens where Marcus conducted his morning patrol, she felt nothing but betrayal coursing through her veins. The previous evening had shattered her world. During what should have been a routine security briefing, Isabella had discovered something that challenged everything she believed about her most trusted protector. A letter, bearing the seal of the neighboring kingdom of Astoria, had been intercepted by palace intelligence. The correspondence, written in code, but successfully deciphered by the royal cryptographers, detailed sensitive information about Valdoria's military defenses, trade agreements, and, most damning of all, the Queen's personal schedule and private activities. The letter was addressed to Lord Chancellor Aldrich Thornfield of Astoria, a man known throughout the realm for his ruthless ambition and his burning desire to see Valdoria absorbed into his own kingdom's territory. For decades, Thornfield had been a thorn in Valdoria's side, constantly probing for weaknesses, seeking ways to destabilize their government, and spreading propaganda about the supposed illegitimacy of Queen Isabella's rule. What made the discovery so devastating was not just the nature of the information contained within the letter, but the signature at its bottom. The intelligence officers had presented their findings with trembling hands, knowing the explosive nature of their discovery. The letter bore the unmistakable signature of Captain Marcus Blackwood, written in his characteristic bold script that Isabella had seen on countless official documents over the years. As Isabella recalled the moment she had seen Marcus's name on that damning piece of parchment, her chest tightened with a mixture of rage and heartbreak. Marcus had been more than just her guard. He had been her confidant, her advisor, and, perhaps most painfully, the man she had secretly harbored feelings for despite the vast gulf between their stations. The thought that he might have betrayed not just her crown, but her trust and her heart was almost unbearable. The Queen turned away from the window as her lady-in-waiting, Dame Catherine Ashford, entered the chamber carrying the morning tea service. Catherine, a woman of middle years with kind eyes and silver-streaked brown hair, had served Isabella since the early days of her reign. She possessed an uncanny ability to read the Queen's moods, and one look at Isabella's face told her that the storm she had sensed building was about to break. "Your Majesty," Catherine said softly, setting the tea service on the ornate mahogany table near the fireplace. "The captain has requested an audience with you this morning. Shall I tell him you're indisposed?" Isabella's laugh was bitter and hollow. "Indisposed? No, Catherine. I think it's time, Captain Blackwood, and I had a very direct conversation about loyalty and betrayal. Tell him I will see him in the blue drawing room in 1 hour. And, Catherine," she paused, meeting her lady-in-waiting's concerned gaze, "ensure that we are not disturbed. What transpires between the captain and myself this morning must remain absolutely confidential." Catherine curtsied deeply, recognizing the gravity in her queen's voice. "Of course, Your Majesty. Shall I also inform the other guards?" "No," Isabella replied sharply. "Let Marcus come alone. If he truly is the traitor that evidence suggests, I want to look him in the eyes when I confront him. I want to see his reaction when I present him with proof of his treachery." As Catherine departed to deliver the message, Isabella moved to her private study, where the intercepted letter lay locked in a secure drawer of her writing desk. She retrieved it with shaking hands, reading once again the damning words that had destroyed her faith in the man she had trusted above all others. The letter detailed information that only someone with intimate access to the royal family could have known. It described the Queen's daily routines, her private meetings with foreign ambassadors, the locations of secret passages within the palace, and even personal details about her habits and preferences. Most shocking of all, it contained information about a covert alliance Isabella had been negotiating with the Kingdom of Meridia, a strategic partnership that was meant to strengthen Valdoria's position against potential threats from Astoria. As Isabella studied the letter for what felt like the 100th time, she noticed details that her initial shock had caused her to overlook. The handwriting, while bearing Marcus's signature, seemed slightly different from his usual script in subtle ways. The paper itself was of a quality not typically used for official correspondence, and there were small ink blots that seemed inconsistent with Marcus's typically meticulous writing style. Despite these observations, the evidence appeared overwhelming. The signature was unmistakably his, the information was accurate and highly classified, and Marcus was one of the few people who would have had access to all of the details contained within the letter. The intelligence officers had been thorough in their analysis, cross-referencing the handwriting with samples from Marcus's official reports, and finding what they deemed to be a definitive match. Isabella folded the letter carefully and placed it in the bodice of her dress, close to her heart, where its presence felt like a dagger. She had 1 hour to compose herself, to prepare for what might be the most difficult conversation of her reign. She needed to confront the man who had sworn to protect her with his life, the man she had grown to care for deeply, with evidence of his ultimate betrayal. The Queen spent the remaining time before the meeting pacing her chambers, alternating between rage and heartbreak. She rehearsed the words she would say, imagined the explanations Marcus might offer, and steeled herself for the possibility that the man she had trusted implicitly was indeed guilty of treason. The weight of her crown, both literal and metaphorical, had never felt heavier than it did in those moments of solitary anguish. When the appointed hour arrived, Isabella made her way to the blue drawing room with measured steps that betrayed none of the turmoil raging within her. The room, with its azure silk wall coverings and gold-accented furnishings, had always been one of her favorites in the palace. It was here that she held private audiences with trusted advisors, where she had made some of the most important decisions of her reign, and where she had shared quiet moments with Marcus during their security briefings. Today, however, the familiar surroundings felt cold and hostile. The very walls seemed to mock her with memories of the trust and camaraderie she had believed she shared with her guard captain. As she settled into the high-backed chair position to face the room's entrance, Isabella felt the letter pressing against her chest like a brand. The sound of approaching footsteps in the corridor outside caused her heart to race. In moments, she would come face to face with Marcus, and the confrontation that would follow would determine not only his fate, but potentially the future of her kingdom. If he was indeed guilty of treason, the implications extended far beyond personal betrayal. The security of Valdoria itself had been compromised, and Isabella would need to take swift and decisive action to protect her people. The door opened, and Captain Marcus Blackwood entered the blue drawing room with his characteristic confident stride. At 35 years of age, he possessed the bearing of a seasoned warrior combined with the refined manners of a courtier. His dark hair was impeccably groomed, his uniform pristine, and his green eyes held their usual warmth as they met Isabella's gaze. If he was guilty of the crimes suggested by the intercepted letter, he showed no outward sign of guilt or anxiety. "Your Majesty," Marcus said, offering a deep bow before straightening to his full height of 6 feet. "You wish to see me?" Isabella studied his face intently, searching for any hint of deception or nervousness. What she saw instead was the same steady confidence, the same loyal demeanor that had characterized their relationship for 15 years. For a moment, doubt crept into her mind. Could this man, who had saved her life on multiple occasions and had shown nothing but devotion to the crown, really be capable of such betrayal? "Please sit," Isabella said, gesturing to the chair positioned across from her own. "We have important matters to discuss, Captain Blackwood." Marcus settled into the indicated chair, his posture alert but relaxed. "Of course, Your Majesty. How may I serve you?" The formal tone of their exchange felt strange and uncomfortable to both of them. Over the years, their relationship had evolved from the strictly professional to something warmer and more personal, though always within the bounds of propriety. They had shared conversations about literature, philosophy, and the challenges of leadership. Marcus had been present during some of Isabella's most vulnerable moments, and she had come to value his counsel almost as much as his protection. Now, sitting across from him with the evidence of his alleged betrayal burning against her chest, Isabella felt as though she were speaking to a stranger. "Captain," she began, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions within her. "In your years of service to the crown, you have proven yourself to be a man of honor and integrity. You have sworn sacred oaths of loyalty and protection. Is that not correct?" Marcus's brow furrowed slightly at the formal tone and the seemingly obvious nature of the question. "That is absolutely correct, Your Majesty. My loyalty to you and to Valdoria is absolute and unwavering. It has been the guiding principle of my life for the past 15 years. Isabella leaned forward slightly, her blue eyes never leaving his face. "And in all that time, Captain, have you ever betrayed the trust one have placed in you? Have you ever shared confidential information with unauthorized parties? Have you ever acted against the interests of this kingdom?" The questions hit Marcus like physical blows. His expression shifted from confusion to concern as he began to understand that this was not a routine security briefing or casual conversation. Something serious was happening, something that called his very loyalty into question. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice taking on a tone of hurt bewilderment, "I have never betrayed your trust. I would die before I would act against your interests or the interests of Valdoria. My oath is sacred to me." What has prompted these questions? Isabella reached into her bodice and withdrew the intercepted letter, her movements deliberate and controlled. The parchment crackled slightly as she unfolded it, the sound seeming unnaturally loud in the suddenly tense atmosphere of the room. "This letter was intercepted yesterday by our intelligence service," she said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "It was intended for Lord Chancellor Aldrich Thornfield of Astoria, a man we both know to be an enemy of our realm. The letter contains highly classified information about our military defenses, our diplomatic negotiations, and my personal schedule and activities." Marcus leaned forward, his face a mask of concern and concentration. "That's extremely serious, Your Majesty." "Do we know who the letter," Isabella continued, cutting him off, "bears your signature, Captain Blackwood?" The words hung in the air between them like a sword suspended by a thread. Marcus's face went pale, his green eyes widening in shock as the full implication of the Queen's words sank in. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound in the room was the soft ticking of the ornate clock on the mantelpiece, and the distant murmur of activity from the palace grounds below. When Marcus finally found his voice, it was barely above a whisper. "Your Majesty, I swear to you by everything I hold sacred, I did not write that letter. I have never communicated with Lord Thornfield or anyone in Astoria. I would never betray you or Valdoria." Isabella's heart ached at the pain and desperation in his voice, but she forced herself to remain stern. The evidence was clear, regardless of her personal feelings. "The handwriting analysis confirms that the signature is yours," she said, extending the letter toward him. "The intelligence officers have compared it to samples from your official reports. The match is conclusive." Marcus took the letter with trembling hands, his eyes scanning the damning document. As he read, his expression shifted from shock to horror to something approaching understanding. When he looked up at Isabella again, there was a new determination in his eyes. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice gaining strength, "I understand why this evidence appears conclusive, but I swear to you that I did not write this letter. Someone has gone to great lengths to make it appear as though I am guilty of treason, but I am being framed." The conviction in his voice gave Isabella pause. She had expected denials, perhaps excuses or explanations, but not this absolute certainty of innocence combined with the suggestion of a deliberate conspiracy. "Who would do such a thing?" she asked. "And why?" Marcus folded the letter carefully and handed it back to her. "I don't know who, Your Majesty, but I have suspicions about why. If someone wanted to destabilize your security, to remove your most trusted protector, framing me for treason would be an effective strategy. With me gone, You would be vulnerable, and your trust in your remaining guards would be shaken. Isabella considered his words carefully. The logic was sound, but it still didn't explain the overwhelming evidence against him. The handwriting, Marcus. How do you explain the handwriting? I don't know, he admitted, but I can tell you that something about this entire situation feels wrong. The timing, the method of discovery, even some of the information in the letter itself. Your Majesty, I have served you faithfully for 15 years. In that time, have I ever given you reason to doubt my loyalty? Isabella's resolve began to waver. Marcus was right. In all their years together, he had never given her cause for suspicion. He had risked his life for her on multiple occasions, had turned down offers of advancement that would have taken him away from her service, and had shown a dedication that went beyond mere professional duty. No, she said quietly, you have never given me reason to doubt you. But the evidence can be fabricated, Marcus interrupted gently. Your Majesty, someone with sufficient skill and resources could forge my signature, could gather the information contained in that letter through other means, and could arrange for it to be intercepted in a way that would cast suspicion on me. As they continued their tense conversation, neither Isabella nor Marcus noticed the small figure that had been listening at the keyhole of the blue drawing-room side entrance. Dame Catherine Ashford's usually kind face was twisted with anxiety as she heard every word of the exchange between the Queen and her captain. When Catherine finally crept away from her eavesdropping position, her mind was racing with the implications of what she had heard. The letter, the accusations, Marcus's protestations of innocence. It was all unfolding exactly as had been planned, but seeing the pain in both the Queen's and the captain's voices made Catherine's heart heavy with guilt. She made her way quickly through the palace corridors to a seldom-used storage room in the East Wing. Once inside, she moved several crates aside to reveal a small hidden panel in the wall. Behind the panel was a communication device that allowed for secret correspondence with contacts outside the palace. Catherine's hand shook as she composed a brief, coded message. The seed has been planted. The Queen suspects the captain. Phase 1 complete. Await further instructions. As she sealed the message and prepared it for transmission, Catherine's reflection caught her eye in a small mirror mounted on the storage room wall. The woman looking back at her was a stranger, a traitor who had betrayed the trust of the Queen, who had shown her nothing but kindness and respect for so many years. But it was too late to turn back now. The wheels of deception had been set in motion, and Catherine had played her part in a conspiracy that would shake the foundations of the Valdorian monarchy. The guilt that gnawed at her heart was a small price to pay for the substantial reward she had been promised by her true employers, agents of Lord Chancellor Thornfield, who had been planning this operation for years. Back in the blue drawing room, Isabella and Marcus continued their confrontation, neither aware that the true architect of the crisis was someone they both trusted implicitly. The letter that threatened to destroy Marcus's reputation and career was indeed a forgery, but one so skillfully crafted that even expert analysis had been fooled. As the morning wore on, the conversation between Queen and Captain would take turns that neither of them anticipated. Marcus would present arguments for his innocence that would plant seeds of doubt in Isabella's mind, while she would struggle with the conflict between the evidence before her and her instinctive trust in the man who had served her so faithfully. The first phase of the conspiracy was complete, but the most dangerous parts were yet to come. For Isabella and Marcus were about to discover that the web of deception surrounding them was far more complex and far more dangerous than either of them could have imagined. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the blue drawing room as Queen Isabella and Captain Marcus continued their tense confrontation. 3 hours had passed since their meeting began, and neither had moved from their positions. The untouched tea service sat cold and forgotten on the side table, a testament to the gravity of their discussion. Marcus had spent the time methodically going through every aspect of the letter, pointing out inconsistencies that he hoped would convince Isabella of his innocence. His military training had taught him to analyze evidence objectively, and despite the personal stakes, he approached the problem with the same systematic thoroughness he would apply to any security threat. Your Majesty, he said, holding the letter up to catch the light streaming through the tall windows, look at the watermark on this paper. It's from Astoria's royal mills, not our own. Why would I use foreign paper to write treasonous correspondence when I have easy access to Valdorian stationery? Isabella leaned closer to examine the watermark he indicated. It was subtle, barely visible unless held at precisely the right angle, but unmistakably bore the crowned eagle symbol of Astoria. The observation was astute, and it gave her pause. Marcus was right. It would be foolish for anyone conducting secret correspondence to use paper that could be traced back to an enemy kingdom. Perhaps, she said hesitantly, you obtained the paper precisely to cast suspicion away from yourself. Using foreign paper could be seen as an attempt to make the letter appear to be planted evidence. Marcus's shoulders sagged slightly at her response. Despite his logical arguments, Isabella seemed determined to view every piece of evidence through the lens of his guilt. He could see the pain in her eyes, could sense the internal struggle between her heart and her duty as queen, but her words cut deep nonetheless. Your Majesty, he said quietly, if I were truly guilty of treason, would I be so foolish as to sign my real name to such a letter? Would I not use an alias, or better yet, leave it unsigned altogether? Before Isabella could respond, a soft knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Dame Catherine's voice came from the corridor outside. Your Majesty, forgive the intrusion, but Prime Minister Aldwin requests an urgent audience. He says it concerns matters of national security. Isabella glanced at Marcus, then called out, Tell the Prime Minister I will see him in my private study in 15 minutes. Captain Blackwood and I are not finished here. Yes, Your Majesty, Catherine replied, but her voice carried an odd tension that neither Isabella nor Marcus noticed in their preoccupation with their own crisis. Prime Minister Richard Aldwin was a man of 62 years who had served Valdoria with distinction for the better part of 3 decades. His silver hair and lined face spoke of the burdens of high office, but his sharp gray eyes missed nothing. When Catherine delivered the Queen's message, he frowned deeply. 15 minutes, he repeated. Catherine, what exactly is transpiring between Her Majesty and the captain? I've been waiting for 2 hours to discuss intelligence reports that could affect the security of the realm. Catherine's heart raced as she struggled to maintain her composure. I'm not privy to the details, Prime Minister, but the Queen seemed quite distressed about some matter concerning Captain Blackwood. Aldwin's frown deepened. As Prime Minister, he was usually informed of any significant security concerns, especially those involving the head of the Queen's Guard. The fact that Isabella was conducting this meeting in secret, without consulting him, was highly unusual and concerning. Has the captain done something wrong? He asked pointedly. Catherine hesitated, knowing that her next words would help spread the poison that was already seeping through the palace. There are whispers, Prime Minister, about some sort of letter, something to do with foreign correspondence. The implications of Catherine's carefully chosen words hit Aldwin immediately. Foreign correspondence involving the head of the Queen's Guard could only mean one thing: potential treason. His face paled as he considered the ramifications for the kingdom's security. Thank you, Catherine, he said grimly. Please ensure that the Queen knows I will be waiting in her study. And, Catherine, this conversation remains strictly between us until I can speak with Her Majesty directly. As the Prime Minister strode away toward the royal study, Catherine allowed herself a small smile of satisfaction. The second phase of the plan was proceeding perfectly. By the end of the day, suspicions about Marcus would have spread throughout the upper echelons of the palace hierarchy, making his eventual disgrace seem both inevitable and justified. Back in the blue drawing room, Marcus was making one final desperate attempt to convince Isabella of his innocence. He had risen from his chair and was pacing the length of the ornate carpet, his usual composure finally cracking under the weight of the accusations against him. Your Majesty, I'm asking you to trust in 15 years of faithful service. I'm asking you to believe in the man you've known, the man who has stood by your side through every crisis, every threat, every moment of danger. If I wanted to betray Valdoria, I've had countless opportunities to do far more damage than sharing troop movements and scheduling information. Isabella watched his agitation with a mixture of sympathy and suspicion. His emotional response seemed genuine, but she had learned through years of royal politics that the most dangerous enemies were often those who appeared most trustworthy. Marcus, she said, using his first name for the first time since the confrontation began, I want to believe you. More than you know, I want to believe that this is all some terrible mistake. But the evidence can be fabricated, he interrupted, his voice rising for the first time. Your Majesty, please, I'm begging you to consider the possibility that someone has gone to extraordinary lengths to frame me. Someone with access to the palace, someone who knows my handwriting, someone who understands palace security well enough to know exactly what information would be most damaging. Isabella's breath caught at his words. The idea that the traitor might be someone within the palace inner circle was a possibility she had not fully considered. If Marcus was being framed, then the real traitor was still at large, still in a position to do untold damage to the kingdom. "Who?" she whispered. "Who would have such access? Who would be capable of this level of deception?" Marcus stopped pacing and turned to face her directly. "I don't know, Your Majesty, but whoever is, they know us both well enough to predict exactly how we would react to this situation. They knew you would confront me privately, knew that my protestations of innocence might be seen as desperation, knew that the very strength of our relationship would make the betrayal seem more devastating." The word relationship hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. Both Isabella and Marcus were acutely aware that their connection went beyond the purely professional, though neither had ever acknowledged it directly. The possibility that their feelings for each other were being weaponized against them added another layer of pain to an already agonizing situation. A second knock at the door broke the charged moment between them. This time, Catherine's voice carried more urgency. "Your Majesty, Prime Minister Aldwin insists that his matter cannot wait. He says it concerns the very letter you're discussing with Captain Blackwood." Isabella's blood ran cold. If the Prime Minister knew about the letter, it meant that word of Marcus's alleged treason was already beginning to spread. Once that happened, containing the damage would become impossible. "Send him in," she called out, her voice steady despite her racing heart. The door opened to admit Prime Minister Aldwin, whose grave expression immediately told both Isabella and Marcus that whatever news he brought would not be welcome. Behind him, Catherine lingered in the doorway, her eyes fixed on Marcus with what appeared to be concern, but was actually calculation. "Your Majesty," Aldwin said, offering a formal bow before his gaze shifted to Marcus. "Captain Blackwood, I understand there has been a significant development regarding palace security." Isabella gestured for the Prime Minister to sit, while Marcus remained standing at attention. The formal atmosphere that had characterized the early part of Isabella and Marcus's conversation returned with uncomfortable intensity. "Prime Minister," Isabella began carefully, "what exactly do you know about recent intelligence intercepts?" Aldwin pulled a leather portfolio from beneath his arm and extracted several documents. "Your Majesty, our intelligence network has been monitoring increased activity from Astrian agents over the past several weeks. We've documented at least 6 attempts to infiltrate our diplomatic correspondence, and yesterday we intercepted communications that suggest a significant intelligence breach within the palace itself." He paused, glancing meaningfully at Marcus. "What's more concerning is that the breach appears to have been ongoing for months, possibly years. Someone with high-level access has been systematically feeding information to Astoria." Marcus felt the room spinning around him as the implications of the Prime Minister's words sank in. If the intelligence suggested a long-term breach, it would make his protestations of innocence seem even more hollow. The case against him was being built from multiple angles, each piece of evidence more damning than the last. "Prime Minister," Marcus said, his voice carefully controlled, "are you suggesting that I am responsible for this breach?" Aldwin's expression was unreadable. "Captain, I am merely reporting what our intelligence services have discovered. A pattern of leaked information that correlates with your access to sensitive materials, and now a letter bearing your signature that contains classified data. The evidence speaks for itself." Isabella watched the exchange between the two men, noting the subtle hostility in Aldwin's tone and the growing desperation in Marcus's demeanor. The Prime Minister's arrival had shifted the dynamics of the situation, making it clear that this was no longer a private matter between Queen and Guard, but a potential affair of state. "There's more," Aldwin continued, consulting his documents. "Our agents in Astoria report that Lord Thornfield has been boasting privately about having an excellent source within our palace. He's apparently been using intelligence from this source to plan what he calls the great reunification of Valdoria and Astoria under Astrian rule." The words hit Isabella like a physical blow. The idea that someone in her inner circle had been facilitating Astoria's plans for conquest was almost too terrible to comprehend. If the intelligence was accurate, The traitor had been helping to plan the destruction of everything she held dear. Marcus stepped forward, his face pale but determined. "Prime Minister, Your Majesty, I swear to you both that I have never communicated with Lord Thornfield or any Astorian agent. If someone has been feeding intelligence to our enemies, it is not me." Aldwin studied Marcus's face intently, as if trying to read the truth in his expression. After a long moment, he said, "Captain, your service record is exemplary, and your loyalty has never been questioned until now. But the evidence against you is substantial and compelling. If you are innocent, then someone has gone to extraordinary lengths to implicate you." "Yes," Marcus said eagerly, grasping at the Prime Minister's words. "That's exactly what I've been trying to tell Her Majesty. Someone is framing me, someone with intimate knowledge of palace operations and access to highly classified information." Aldwin nodded slowly. "If that's true, then we're dealing with a conspiracy of considerable sophistication. The real traitor would have to be someone above suspicion, someone whose loyalty is taken for granted, someone who—" He trailed off, his eyes widening as a disturbing thought occurred to him. "What is it?" Isabella asked, noting the change in the Prime Minister's expression. "Your Majesty," Aldwin said carefully, "if Captain Blackwood is being framed, then we need to consider who would have the means, motive, and opportunity to orchestrate such a deception. It would require someone with access to the captain's personal effects, knowledge of his handwriting, and detailed information about palace security protocols." Isabella felt a chill run down her spine as she began to understand where Aldwin's reasoning was leading. The circle of people with such comprehensive access was extremely small, comprising only her most trusted advisors and personal staff. Marcus, too, was following the Prime Minister's logic, and his face grew increasingly grim as the implications became clear. "You're suggesting that the real traitor is someone in the inner circle, someone we all trust implicitly." "I'm not suggesting anything yet," Aldwin replied cautiously. "But we need to consider all possibilities. Your Majesty, who besides yourself and Captain Blackwood knew about the contents of yesterday's security briefings? Who would have had access to the scheduling information contained in that letter?" Isabella's mind raced through the list of people with such access. Besides herself and Marcus, only a handful of individuals would have known all the details mentioned in the intercepted correspondence. The Prime Minister himself, her private secretary Lord Edmund Fairfax, her lady-in-waiting Dame Catherine, and her chief diplomatic advisor, Sir Reginald Hawthorne. As she mentally reviewed each name on the list, Isabella found herself reluctant to suspect any of them. These were people she had known and trusted for years, individuals whose loyalty she had never questioned. The idea that one of them could be a traitor was almost as painful as the possibility that Marcus himself was guilty. "Prime Minister," she said slowly, "you're asking me to suspect some of my oldest and most trusted advisors. These are people who have served the crown faithfully for decades." "Your Majesty," Aldwin replied gently, "the most effective spies are often those who appear most trustworthy. If Astoria has indeed placed an agent within our inner circle, they would have spent years building a reputation for loyalty and competence." Marcus had been listening to this exchange with growing excitement. Finally, someone else was considering the possibility that he was innocent, that the real traitor was still at large. But his relief was tempered by the realization that identifying the actual culprit would be incredibly difficult. Where do we proceed?" he asked. "How do we identify the real traitor without alerting them to our suspicions?" Aldwin considered the question carefully. "We need to conduct a careful investigation without appearing to do so. We need to examine everyone's access to the compromised information, their movements, their communications, and their financial records. Most importantly, we need to do this discreetly." Isabella nodded agreement, but her heart was heavy with the knowledge that the investigation would necessarily involve suspecting and investigating some of her closest companions. The bonds of trust that had held her inner circle together for so many years were about to be tested in ways she had never imagined. "There's another problem," Marcus said quietly. "If we're right about this being a frame-up, then the real traitor knows that their plan is succeeding. They're probably expecting me to be arrested or dismissed from service. If that doesn't happen, they may become suspicious and either escalate their activities or flee before we can identify them." The observation was astute and deeply troubling. If the conspiracy was as sophisticated as it appeared, the conspirators would have contingency plans for various scenarios. They would be monitoring the situation closely, ready to adapt their strategy as circumstances changed. Aldwin stood and began pacing, his mind working through the tactical challenges they faced. We need to appear to be following their expected script while secretly conducting our investigation. Captain, I'm afraid that means you may need to be suspended from active duty pending a full inquiry. Marcus had expected this outcome, but hearing it stated aloud still felt like a punch to the stomach. His entire identity was bound up in his role as the Queen's protector. To be suspended, even temporarily, and even as part of a larger strategy, felt like a kind of death. I understand the necessity, he said, though his voice betrayed his pain. But, Your Majesty, I cannot bear the thought of leaving you unprotected while the real traitor remains at large. Isabella's heart ached at the concern in his voice. Even facing disgrace and potentially execution for treason, Marcus's first thought was for her safety. It was exactly the kind of selfless dedication that had characterized their entire relationship, and it made her more determined than ever to prove his innocence. Your temporary replacement will be Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Thornton, Aldwin announced. She's highly qualified and completely above suspicion. At the mention of Lieutenant Colonel Thornton, Marcus's expression brightened slightly. Sarah was one of his most capable subordinates, a woman whose loyalty and competence were beyond question. If anyone could protect Isabella while maintaining the appearance that nothing unusual was happening, it would be Sarah. An excellent choice, Marcus agreed. Sarah is completely trustworthy and highly skilled. She'll take good care of Her Majesty. As the three of them continued to discuss the details of the investigation and Marcus's suspension, none of them noticed the small figure that had returned to eavesdrop at the side entrance of the blue drawing room. Dame Catherine's face was pale with anxiety as she listened to their plans to identify the real traitor. The conversation was not proceeding as she had expected. Instead of immediately arresting Marcus or having him executed for treason, they were beginning to suspect that he might be innocent. Worse, they were planning to investigate everyone with access to the compromised information, which would inevitably lead them to examine her own activities. Catherine's mind raced as she considered her options. Her handlers in Astoria had prepared for various contingencies, but they had not anticipated that Isabella and her advisors would so quickly consider the possibility of a frame-up. The plan had assumed that the evidence against Marcus would be accepted at face value, leading to his swift arrest and execution. Now Catherine faced a terrible choice. She could try to sabotage the investigation from within, using her position as Isabella's trusted lady-in-waiting to misdirect suspicion and protect her own cover. Or she could attempt to flee immediately, abandoning years of careful planning, but potentially saving her own life. As she crept away from the door to consider her options, Catherine's reflection once again caught her eye in a mirror hanging in the corridor. The woman looking back at her was no longer just a traitor, but a trapped traitor whose carefully constructed world was beginning to collapse around her. The game was becoming more dangerous by the hour, and Catherine knew that her next moves would determine whether she would escape with her life or face the executioner's block. The conspiracy that had seemed so carefully planned now felt fragile and precarious, threatened by the very loyalty and intelligence of the people it sought to destroy. In the blue drawing room, Isabella, Marcus, and Aldwin continued their planning, unaware that their conversation was helping the real traitor understand exactly how much danger she was in. The next 24 hours would be crucial for all of them, as Hunter and Hunted maneuvered for position in a deadly game where the stakes were nothing less than the future of the kingdom. The palace corridors echoed with unusual tension as dawn broke over Valdoria 3 days after Captain Marcus Blackwood's suspension. The official announcement had cited routine security review procedures, but whispers spread through the servant quarters like wildfire. Everyone knew something significant had happened, though the exact details remained shrouded in carefully maintained secrecy. Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Thornton had assumed her temporary role as head of the Queen's Guard with characteristic efficiency and discretion. At 32, she possessed the rare combination of tactical brilliance and political awareness that made her invaluable in the current crisis. Her auburn hair was always pulled back in a severe military bun, and Her green eyes missed nothing as she assessed the security implications of every person who entered Isabella's presence. Unlike Marcus's warm, personal approach to royal protection, Sarah maintained strictly professional boundaries. She spoke only when necessary, positioned herself with mathematical precision to observe all potential threats, and kept detailed logs of every interaction the Queen had with palace staff and visitors. What others interpreted as cold efficiency was actually a deliberate strategy to identify patterns that might reveal the real traitor's identity. Queen Isabella found the change difficult to adjust to. She missed Marcus's quiet presence, the subtle way he could communicate reassurance with just a glance, and the comfortable familiarity that had developed between them over 15 years. Sarah's competence was never in question, but the relationship felt purely transactional in a way that left Isabella feeling isolated and vulnerable. The investigation into the intelligence leak had begun in earnest, though it proceeded with the utmost discretion. Prime Minister Aldwin had assembled a small team of his most trusted intelligence officers to examine the financial records, communications, and movements of everyone with access to the compromised information. The work was painstaking and necessarily slow, as they could not afford to alert the real traitor to their suspicions. Meanwhile, Marcus had been confined to quarters in a guest wing of the palace, officially for his own protection while the investigation proceeded. In reality, his confinement served multiple purposes. It maintained the appearance that he was being treated as a suspected traitor, while also keeping him available for consultation as the investigation developed. The isolation was difficult for a man accustomed to constant activity and responsibility, but he used the time to review everything he could remember about recent security protocols and personnel changes. It was during one of these review sessions that Marcus made a disturbing discovery. As he went through his personal papers and official documents, looking for any clue that might help identify the real traitor, he noticed that several items were missing from his private quarters. The missing articles were subtle: a sample of his handwriting from an old letter, a spare palace seal that he kept for emergency communications, and, most significantly, a practice signature sheet he had used years earlier when learning to replicate royal seals for authentication purposes. The implications were immediately clear to Marcus. Someone had been in his quarters, someone with access to areas that should have been secure, someone who had deliberately stolen items that could be used to forge his signature and create false documents. He requested an immediate audience with the Prime Minister to share this discovery. When Aldwin arrived at Marcus's temporary quarters, he found a former guard captain in a state of controlled excitement. The missing items represented the first concrete evidence that Marcus was indeed being framed, and they provided important clues about how the conspiracy had been executed. Prime Minister, Marcus said, indicating the gaps in his personal effects where the missing items should have been. This proves that someone has been planning this frame-up for months, possibly years. They've had access to my private quarters on multiple occasions, and they've taken exactly the materials they would need to create convincing forgeries. Aldwin examined the areas Marcus indicated, noting the subtle signs that someone had carefully searched through the belongings and removed specific items. The selection was too precise to be random theft. It clearly represented the systematic acquisition of materials for a specific purpose. "This is excellent progress," Aldwin said, pulling out a small notebook to record the details. "It confirms our theory about the nature of the conspiracy. But it also raises new questions. Who would have had regular access to your quarters? The cleaning staff? Maintenance workers? Other members of the guard?" Marcus considered the question carefully. The cleaning staff work in teams and are supervised, so it would be difficult for any of them to conduct this kind of systematic theft without being noticed. Maintenance workers only come when specifically requested. That leaves other guards, senior palace staff, and... He paused, reluctant to voice the obvious conclusion. "The inner circle," Aldwin finished grimly. "The same group we've already identified as having access to the intelligence that was leaked." As they discussed the implications of this discovery, neither man noticed the small listening device that had been carefully concealed behind a decorative tapestry in Marcus's quarters. Dame Catherine had installed it during one of her routine visits to check on the disgraced guard captain's well-being, presenting her visits as acts of kindness while actually gathering intelligence on the investigation's progress. Catherine was currently in her own chambers, listening to the conversation through a small receiver hidden in her jewelry box. What she heard filled her with dread. The investigation was proceeding faster than her handlers had anticipated, and The missing items from Marcus's quarters would inevitably lead them to examine who had access to those areas. Her mind raced through her options as she considered the immediate threat to her position. She had been careful to always visit Marcus's quarters with legitimate reasons, bringing messages from the Queen, checking on his needs, or delivering meals. But if they examined her access patterns closely enough, they might notice that her visits had been more frequent than strictly necessary. More urgently, Catherine knew she needed to warn her Astorian contacts that their timeline was accelerating. The original plan had called for several more months of intelligence gathering before the final phase of the conspiracy would be implemented. But with suspicions growing and the investigation gaining momentum, they might need to execute their endgame immediately. She carefully removed the listening device from her jewelry box and composed a brief, coded message. Harvest compromised. Accelerate timeline. Require immediate extraction protocols. The message would be transmitted through a network of Astorian agents embedded throughout Valdoria, eventually reaching Lord Thornfield himself. Catherine knew that once she sent this message, there would be no turning back. The conspiracy would either succeed completely or fail catastrophically, with no middle ground possible. As she prepared to transmit the message, Catherine's hands shook with the magnitude of what she was about to set in motion. The accelerated timeline would require desperate measures, actions that would put innocent people at risk and potentially destabilize the entire kingdom. But her own survival depended on the success of the conspiracy, and she had long since passed the point where she could consider backing out. Meanwhile, in the Queen's private study, Isabella was meeting with Sir Reginald Hawthorne, her chief diplomatic advisor, to discuss the deteriorating relationship with Astoria. Sir Reginald was a distinguished man of 58 years, with silver hair and intelligent brown eyes that reflected his decades of experience in international relations. He had served 3 generations of Valdorian monarchs and was considered one of the kingdom's most valuable assets in matters of foreign policy. "Your Majesty," Sir Reginald was saying, his voice grave with concern, "our embassy in Astoria reports increasing hostility from Lord Thornfield's faction. There are rumors that they're planning some sort of aggressive action against Valdoria, though our agents haven't been able to determine the specifics." Isabella listened to his report with growing unease. The timing of increased Astorian aggression, coming immediately after the discovery of the intelligence leak, suggested a connection between the two developments. If Astoria was preparing to act on the intelligence they had received, Valdoria could be facing an imminent crisis. "What kind of aggressive action?" Isabella asked. "Military? Economic? Diplomatic?" "That's what's most concerning, Your Majesty. The reports are deliberately vague, but they suggest something more sophisticated than a simple military incursion. Lord Thornfield has been meeting privately with several high-ranking officials, including some from kingdoms that have historically been neutral in our conflicts with Astoria. The implications were troubling. If Astoria was building a coalition against Valdoria, they could face pressure on multiple fronts simultaneously. Economic sanctions, diplomatic isolation, and military threats could combine to create an existential crisis for the kingdom. Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Thornton, who had been standing silently at attention during the meeting, stepped forward slightly. "Your Majesty, if I may suggest, perhaps it would be wise to increase security protocols throughout the palace. If Astoria is planning aggressive action based on intelligence they've received, they may also be planning to eliminate key leadership figures." Isabella nodded approvingly at Sarah's assessment. The woman's tactical thinking was sound, and her concern for palace security was exactly what the situation required. "Agreed," Isabella said. "Double the guard rotations and implement additional screening procedures for all palace staff and visitors. I also want daily briefings on any unusual activity or communications detected by our intelligence services." As Sir Reginald and Sarah discussed the specific details of enhanced security measures, Isabella's thoughts drifted to Marcus. His absence from these crucial discussions felt like a missing piece in a complex puzzle. For 15 years, she had relied on his tactical insights and his intuitive understanding of security threats. Without his counsel, she felt like she was operating with incomplete information. The meeting was interrupted by the arrival of a palace messenger, who presented Isabella with an urgent communication from the kingdom's southern border. As she read the message, her face paled with alarm. "What is it, Your Majesty?" Sir Reginald asked, noting her distressed expression. "Astorian troops have been observed massing near the Meridian Pass, Isabella replied, her voice tight with concern. Our border guards report at least 3 regiments, with more arriving daily. The news sent a chill through the room. The Meridian Pass was the primary route for any land-based invasion of Valdoria from Astoria. If Lord Thornfield was positioning troops there, it could only mean that he was preparing for military action. Sarah immediately stepped into tactical mode. Your Majesty, we need to mobilize our own forces immediately. If Astoria is planning an invasion, every hour of delay gives them additional advantage. Isabella nodded, but she also recognized that military mobilization would be seen as an act of aggression by neutral kingdoms and could provide Astoria with justification for their own hostile actions. The situation was becoming a dangerous game of escalation that could rapidly spiral out of control. Sir Reginald, she said, send immediate communications to our allies. I want them to understand that we're responding to Astorian aggression, not initiating it. Sarah, begin preliminary mobilization of our border defenses, but do so discreetly. I don't want to provide Lord Thornfield with propaganda about Valdorian warmongering. As her advisors began implementing her orders, Isabella felt the weight of leadership pressing down on her with unprecedented force. The kingdom was facing potential war. There was a traitor somewhere within her inner circle, and her most trusted protector was under suspicion of treason. The convergence of these crises felt almost too much to bear. Unknown to Isabella and her advisors, their conversation had been monitored by Catherine through another carefully placed listening device. The news about Astorian troop movements confirmed what Catherine already knew from her secret communications. The conspiracy was entering its final phase, and Lord Thornfield was preparing to use military force to achieve what espionage and subterfuge had made possible. Catherine's role in the coming crisis would be crucial. As the Queen's lady-in-waiting, she had access to Isabella's personal schedule, her private communications, and, most importantly, her location at any given time. When Astorian agents infiltrated the palace during the chaos of the military mobilization, Catherine would be the one to ensure they could reach their primary target. The next phase of the plan called for the systematic elimination of Valdoria's key leadership figures during a carefully orchestrated emergency that would provide cover for the assassinations. Isabella would be the primary target, but Prime Minister Aldwin and other senior officials were also marked for death. With the government decapitated and the kingdom in chaos, Astoria could present its military intervention as a humanitarian effort to restore order. Catherine knew that her own survival depended on the perfect execution of this plan. If any aspect failed, if any of the intended targets survived, she would be exposed as a traitor and face execution. But if the plan succeeded, she would be richly rewarded with a position of power in the new Astorian administration of Valdoria. As evening approached, Catherine made her final preparations for what would either be her greatest triumph or her last night alive. She reviewed the detailed floor plans of the palace that she had provided to her Astorian contacts, double-checked the security protocols that she had systematically undermined over the past months, and confirmed that all the listening devices were functioning properly. The irony of her position was not lost on her. For years, she had been trusted with Isabella's most intimate secrets, had been present during the Queen's most vulnerable moments, and had even developed a genuine affection for the woman she was now planning to betray. But the promise of wealth and power had proven stronger than any feelings of loyalty or friendship. As Catherine prepared for sleep, knowing it might be her last night in the palace, she allowed herself one moment of doubt. Isabella had been kind to her, had trusted her implicitly, and had treated her more like a friend than a servant. The thought of watching the Queen die at the hands of Astorian assassins filled Catherine with unexpected sadness. But it was too late for regrets. The wheels of conspiracy were already in motion, and there was no way to stop what was coming without exposing herself as the architect of the betrayal. Tomorrow would bring either the destruction of everything Isabella held dear, or Catherine's own death as a discovered traitor. The palace settled into an uneasy quiet as night fell. But in several different locations, key players in the developing drama were making final preparations for what promised to be a decisive confrontation. Isabella reviewed military reports and contingency plans, unaware that her most trusted lady-in-waiting was providing her enemies with real-time intelligence about her activities. Marcus continued his confinement, analyzing every detail of the evidence against him and trying to identify the real traitor, not knowing that his every word was being monitored and reported to his enemies. Prime Minister Aldwin coordinated the secret investigation while also managing the kingdom's response to the Astrian military buildup, not realizing that the two crises were intimately connected and that the real traitor was someone he trusted completely. And in the shadows of the palace, the final preparations for betrayal and bloodshed were being made by someone who had spent years earning the trust and affection of those she was about to destroy. The morning would bring revelations that would shake the kingdom to its foundations and determine whether Valdoria would survive as an independent realm or fall to the sophisticated conspiracy that had been years in the making. The pre-dawn darkness that enveloped Valdoria Palace carried an ominous stillness that made even the experienced guards uneasy. Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Thornton had been awake since 3 in the morning, conducting her third security sweep of the night. Something felt wrong, though she couldn't identify exactly what was triggering her instincts. The palace seemed too quiet, the shadows too deep, and the usual sounds of nighttime activity were conspicuously absent. As Sarah completed her rounds, she noticed subtle signs that increased her anxiety. A window left slightly ajar in a corridor where all windows should have been secured, scuff marks on walls where no maintenance had been scheduled, and, most disturbing of all, 2 guards at their posts who seemed unusually nervous when she approached them for routine checks. These guards, both of whom she had known for years, avoided eye contact and gave responses that seemed rehearsed rather than natural. Her military training had taught her to trust her instincts, and those instincts were screaming that the palace was in immediate danger. Sarah made her way quickly to the Queen's chambers, where she found Isabella already awake and dressed, standing at her window and staring out at the horizon where the first hints of dawn were beginning to appear. "Your Majesty," Sarah said quietly, "I believe we may have a security breach in progress. I recommend that you move immediately to the secure bunker beneath the East Wing." Isabella turned from the window, noting the urgency in Sarah's voice and the tension in her posture. In the 3 days since Sarah had assumed responsibility for her protection, Isabella had learned to read the subtle signs that indicated when her new guard captain sensed genuine danger. "What have you observed?" Isabella asked, moving away from the window and toward the wardrobe where she kept a pre-packed emergency bag for exactly such situations. "Multiple indicators that we may have hostile agents within the palace," Sarah replied, positioning herself between Isabella and the door. "Guards exhibiting suspicious behavior, signs of unauthorized movement in restricted areas, and communications equipment that may have been tampered with." As if summoned by their conversation, Dame Catherine appeared in the doorway, her usual composed demeanor replaced by apparent anxiety. She was fully dressed despite the early hour, and her hands trembled slightly as she approached Isabella. "Your Majesty," Catherine said, her voice carrying convincing distress, "I've just received word from the kitchen staff. They've discovered evidence of poisoning in the water supply to your private dining room. We need to evacuate you immediately." Sarah's eyes narrowed as she studied Catherine's appearance and behavior. Something about the lady-in-waiting's timing and manner struck her as suspicious. Why would Catherine be fully dressed and alert at this hour? How had she received information from the kitchen staff before Sarah's own security network had detected the problem? "Dame Catherine," Sarah said carefully, "can you describe exactly how you received this information?" Catherine's momentary hesitation was almost imperceptible, but Sarah caught it. "One of the kitchen maids came to my chambers. She was terrified and could barely speak coherently." Isabella was already moving toward her emergency bag, but Sarah held up a hand to stop her. "Your Majesty, I recommend we verify this information before taking any action. If there truly is a poisoning attempt, my security protocols would have detected it. I suggest we remain here while I confirm the report." Catherine's face flushed with what appeared to be frustration. "Lieutenant Colonel, every moment we delay puts Her Majesty at greater risk. The maid was very specific about the type of poison detected. We must move now." The exchange between Sarah and Catherine was creating a palpable tension in the room. Isabella found herself caught between conflicting advice from 2 people she trusted, though her trust in Catherine extended back many more years than her relationship with Sarah. "Sarah," Isabella said finally, "can you at least verify the report while we prepare for potential evacuation?" Sarah nodded reluctantly, but She was increasingly convinced that Catherine's urgent evacuation request was part of whatever threat she had sensed during her security sweeps. Your Majesty, I'll verify the kitchen situation, but I strongly recommend that you do not leave this room until I return. If there are indeed hostile agents in the palace, moving through the corridors could expose you to additional danger. After Sarah departed to investigate Catherine's claims, Isabella found herself alone with her lady-in-waiting for what would prove to be the last time. Catherine's behavior had become increasingly agitated, and she seemed to be listening for sound from the corridor outside. "Catherine," Isabella said gently, "you seem very distressed. Is there something more you haven't told me?" Catherine's composure finally cracked as the weight of her deception and the imminent danger of exposure overwhelmed her ability to maintain her facade. Years of carefully constructed loyalty dissolved in an instant as she realized that the investigation was closing in on her and that her only chance of survival lay in the success of the morning's operation. "Your Majesty," Catherine said, her voice breaking with emotion, "there is so much you don't understand. So much that I wish I could have told you years ago." Isabella moved closer to her lady-in-waiting, concerned by the obvious distress in Catherine's voice and manner. "Catherine, whatever it is, you can tell me. We've shared so many secrets over the years. You know that you have my complete trust." The irony of Isabella's words was devastating to Catherine. The trust that Isabella offered so freely was the very thing that Catherine had been systematically betraying for years. The genuine affection in the Queen's voice made what Catherine was about to do feel like the most terrible crime imaginable. "The truth," Catherine whispered, "is that I have been lying to you for so very long. The truth is that everything you believe about Captain Blackwood's loyalty is correct, and everything you believe about my loyalty is wrong." Isabella's face went pale as the implications of Catherine's words began to sink in. "What are you saying, Catherine?" Catherine moved to the chamber door and turned the heavy lock, securing them inside. When she turned back to face Isabella, her expression had completely changed. The masks of loyalty and friendship that she had worn for so many years had fallen away, revealing something cold and calculating beneath. "I'm saying, Your Majesty, that I have been working for Lord Thornfield and the Kingdom of Astoria for 8 years. I'm saying that I forged the letter that implicated Captain Blackwood. I'm saying that every secret you've shared with me, every private moment you've trusted me with, every vulnerability you've revealed has been reported to your enemies." Isabella staggered backward, as if she had been physically struck. The betrayal was so complete, so devastating, that her mind struggled to process it. Catherine, who had comforted her during her darkest moments, who had been present for her most private conversations, who had been like a sister to her, was revealed as her greatest enemy. "But why?" Isabella whispered, her voice breaking with pain and disbelief. "I trusted you completely. I cared for you. How could you do this?" Catherine's expression softened momentarily as she saw the genuine anguish in Isabella's face. Despite everything, despite years of careful emotional distance, she had developed real feelings for the Queen she was betraying. But it was too late for regrets or second thoughts. "They offered me wealth beyond imagining," Catherine said quietly. "They offered me a position of real power in their new order. And they made it very clear that refusal would result in the deaths of people I care about. Your Majesty, you have no idea how ruthless Lord Thornfield can be." Isabella's shock was rapidly giving way to rage. "So you chose money and power over loyalty and friendship? You chose to destroy everything I've worked to build for personal gain." "It was never supposed to go this far," Catherine protested, though her words sounded hollow even to herself. "The original plan was simply to gather intelligence. But when the investigation began identifying inconsistencies in their evidence, when you started suspecting that Captain Blackwood might be innocent, they accelerated the timeline." Isabella's mind was racing as she processed the full implications of Catherine's confession. If Catherine was the real traitor, then Marcus was innocent, and he was currently confined while the person responsible for years of intelligence leaks was standing in front of her. "Marcus," Isabella said, her voice filled with horror at what she had put him through. "I accused him of treason. I doubted 15 years of faithful service because of lies that you fed me." Catherine nodded miserably. "Captain Blackwood is completely innocent. Every accusation against him was fabricated. The forged letter, the manufactured evidence, the timing of the discovery, It was all carefully orchestrated to destroy him and isolate you from your most capable protector. The sound of footsteps in the corridor outside interrupted their conversation. Catherine's head snapped toward the door, and Isabella could see fear replacing the guilt in her expression. "Who is that?" Isabella demanded. "Astrian agents," Catherine whispered. "They've infiltrated the palace during the night shift change. The evacuation I proposed was meant to move you into their hands. When that failed, they proceeded with their backup plan." Isabella felt terror grip her as she realized the full scope of the danger she was facing. Not only was she trapped in her chambers with a confessed traitor, but enemy agents were moving through her palace, apparently with the intention of eliminating her and her government. "How many?" she asked, her voice steady despite her fear. "A dozen, possibly more," Catherine replied. "They've been planning this operation for months. Your Majesty, I know you have every reason to hate me, but if you want to survive the next hour, you need to listen to me." Isabella stared at the woman who had been her closest female companion for so many years, trying to reconcile the Catherine she had known with the traitor standing before her. "Why should I trust anything you say now?" "Because," Catherine said desperately, "despite everything I've done, despite all the lies and betrayals, I don't want to watch you die. When this operation was being planned, I thought of you as just a target, just an obstacle to be removed. But after years of being near you, of seeing your kindness and your strength, I can't bear the thought of what they're going to do." The confession was interrupted by the sound of the door handle being tested from outside. When the door didn't open, there was a brief pause followed by whispered voices in a language that Isabella recognized as Astrian. Catherine grabbed Isabella's arm urgently. "There's a hidden passage behind the tapestry near your dressing table. It leads to the old servant stairs that connect to the wine cellars. From there, you can reach the secure bunker that Lieutenant Colonel Thornton mentioned." Isabella hesitated, torn between her desire to escape and her inability to trust the person offering her the means of escape. "How do I know this isn't another trap?" "Because," Catherine said, tears streaming down her face, "I'm not going with you. When those agents break down this door and find a room empty, they'll know someone helped you escape. They'll know it was me. Lord Thornfield doesn't forgive failure or betrayal, even from his own agents." The sound from outside the door were becoming more urgent. Isabella could hear what sounded like tools being used to work on the lock mechanism. In moments, the door would give way, and she would be face to face with assassins sent by her kingdom's greatest enemy. "Catherine," Isabella said, her voice filled with a complex mixture of anger, pity, and desperate gratitude. "Come with me. Whatever you've done, whatever mistakes you've made, you don't deserve to die for them." Catherine shook her head sadly. "Your Majesty, I betrayed everything you stand for. I've endangered your life, your kingdom, and the lives of countless innocent people. If I survive this, I'll spend the rest of my life trying to atone for what I've done. But right now, the only thing that matters is getting you to safety." Isabella moved toward the tapestry Catherine had indicated, but she paused at the hidden entrance. "What about Marcus? He's still confined, still under suspicion. If these agents are moving through the palace, he's completely vulnerable. Lieutenant Colonel Thornton is already moving to secure Captain Blackwood," Catherine said. "I sent her a coded message revealing my identity and the locations of all the listening devices I placed throughout the palace. She'll get him to safety." As Isabella disappeared into the hidden passage, she heard the chamber door finally give way behind her. The last sound she heard before the passage wall closed was Catherine's voice, speaking in fluent Astrian to the agents who had just entered the room. Isabella's escape through the hidden passages of the palace was a terrifying journey through dusty corridors she had never known existed. The sounds of conflict echoed through the walls around her as palace guards engaged the infiltrating agents in running battles throughout the building. She could hear shouted orders, the clash of weapons, and, occasionally, the terrible sounds of people crying out in pain or fear. When she finally reached the secure bunker beneath the East Wing, Isabella found it already occupied by Prime Minister Aldwin, several key advisors, and, to her enormous relief, Marcus Blackwood. Sarah Thornton had indeed received Catherine's message and had moved quickly to secure the most important members of the government. Marcus's face when he saw Isabella enter the bunker was a mixture of relief, joy, and overwhelming guilt. He immediately moved to her side, his professional composure cracking as he saw the evidence of tears on her cheeks and the obvious trauma she had endured. "Your Majesty," he said softly, "are you injured?" Isabella shook her head, then surprised everyone in the bunker by embracing Marcus tightly. For a moment, protocol and royal dignity were forgotten as she held onto the man whose loyalty she had wrongly questioned. "I'm so sorry, Marcus," she whispered. "I doubted you. I believed lies about you. I put you through hell because I trusted the wrong person." Marcus held her gently, his own emotions threatening to overwhelm him. "Your Majesty, you had evidence that appeared conclusive. You acted as any responsible ruler would have acted. There is nothing to forgive." Prime Minister Aldwin approached them with urgent news. "Your Majesty, Lieutenant Colonel Thornton reports that the immediate threat has been contained. All of the Asterian agents have been either captured or eliminated. But we've received intelligence that this morning's attack was only the first phase of a much larger operation." Isabella reluctantly separated from Marcus, forcing herself back into the role of queen despite the emotional turmoil of the morning. "What kind of larger operation?" "The Asterian forces massed at Meridian Pass have begun moving across our border," Aldwin reported grimly. "Lord Thornfield is using the palace infiltration as justification for what he's calling a humanitarian intervention to restore order to Valdoria." The implications were staggering. The morning's events had been designed not just to eliminate Isabella and her government, but to create the pretext for a full-scale Asterian invasion. Even though the assassination attempt had failed, Lord Thornfield was proceeding with his military plans. "Where is Catherine now?" Isabella asked quietly. "Dead," Sarah Thornton reported as she entered the bunker. "She fought the Asterian agents when they realized you had escaped. We found her body in your chambers. She had been shot multiple times, but she had also killed 2 of the agents before they overwhelmed her." Isabella closed her eyes, processing this final piece of Catherine's betrayal and redemption. In the end, the woman who had deceived her for so many years had chosen to sacrifice her life to protect the queen she had wronged. "She saved my life," Isabella said softly. "After years of betraying me, in the final moments, she chose to save my life." The bunker fell silent as everyone processed the complex tragedy of Catherine's story. She had been both traitor and hero, betrayer and savior, enemy and friend. Her death marked the end of one phase of the crisis, but the beginning of what promised to be an even more dangerous challenge. Outside the bunker, Valdoria was at war. Asterian forces were crossing the border, and the kingdom faced the greatest threat to its independence in its 1,000-year history. But inside the bunker, surrounded by her loyal advisors, and with Marcus once again at her side, Queen Isabella began planning the defense of everything she held dear. The conspiracy that had nearly destroyed her kingdom from within had been exposed and defeated. Now came the even greater challenge of defending Valdoria against the external threat that had been made possible by that internal betrayal. The real war was just beginning. 6 months after the devastating attack on Valdoria Palace, Queen Isabella stood on the ramparts of Castle Meridian, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant shades of gold and crimson. The fortress, which had served as her temporary capital during the war, now witnessed the signing of a peace treaty that would reshape the political landscape of the region for generations to come. The war that Lord Thornfield had initiated with such confidence had not proceeded as he had anticipated. The failure of the palace infiltration had left Isabella and her government intact, and the revelation of Catherine's 8-year espionage operation had provided Valdoria with crucial intelligence about Asterian military plans and capabilities. More importantly, it had given Isabella the moral authority to call upon her allies for support in what was clearly a war of aggression initiated by Astoria. Captain Marcus Blackwood approached the Queen's position on the ramparts, his dress uniform bearing new decorations earned during the recent conflict. His promotion to general and appointment as Royal Defense Minister had been among Isabella's first acts after the war's conclusion. The man who had been falsely accused of treason was now responsible for ensuring that such threats could never again come so close to destroying the kingdom. "Your Majesty," Marcus said formally, though his eyes held the warmth that had characterized their relationship since the truth about Catherine's betrayal had been revealed. "Prime Minister Aldwin reports that Lord